Do you want to know all about dinosaurs? And how they came to rule the Earth for 150 million plus years? Well, it's not going to be possible to tell you every single detail. But I'm not going to drag this out for 2 hours. I'm giving you everything you need to know as fast as possible. By the end of this, you'll understand about what existed and when existed, and about the rise and the fall of these great beings. Let's get into it. Starting on the Triassic Period, 230 million years ago is when the first dinosaurs started to appear. But of course, they didn't start out as giants. They evolved over time. During this time, they were quite small, very pest-like, if you will. Things like the Coelophysis, a small theropod that was relatively small and agile, long neck, strong little legs, and a mouth perfect for catching little critters, and was a very lightweight, so it could sprint very fast for long periods of time without trouble. Now, this trend would follow with other small dinosaurs, like some of these you see here. With one of the most iconic ones, the Eoraptor, a tiny but successful predator with a set of weapons like razor-sharp teeth and claws that did all the work for this small guy's little frame. For vegetation or little prey items, as this guy was probably an omnivore, due to it having a heterodont dentition, which basically means the creature has different sets of teeth for different things, like grasping fast little rodents or cutting up little leaves and other vegetation, to make a little salad. Now, back to the Coelophysis, it had an odd reputation. In the early 1880s is when our first finds of this early dinosaur were excavated. Now, later on in 1947, we found something weird. There was a pile of hundreds of skeletons of them, all together found in Mexico, which is known as the bone bed. This suggests that some kind of flash flood occurred, burying them all alive. Now, following the trend of these small carnivores, one of the other earliest beings was the Herrerasaurus, very similar to Coelophysis with a relatively similar body plan, but was definitely way deadlier, as heavier adults could reach 400 pounds, or other estimates even put them upwards of 700 pounds, and a length of 3 meters. Much scarier than Coelophysis, because Coelophysis was only around 40 pounds and 2 meters. The Herrerasaurus also had 3 claws and a bottom jaw with inward-shaping teeth, perfect for grasping little prey. And just as an aside, some of these are not dinosaurs, like the Prehistoric and the Apatosaurus, which are a part of one of my favorite groups of all time, the Pseudotsuchians. The Triassic was full of smaller but successful predators that dominated the land. But what happened after that, you may ask? Well, an extinction event, which was mainly caused by volcanic eruptions that killed around 70% of all marine and land life. It's a possibility that the release of huge amounts of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide significantly disrupted Earth's climate. In the end, ended most things in that period. Now, in the early Jurassic, it was now slightly warmer due to the rapid changing conditions around Earth, but like I said earlier, 70% of all life died. And the rest of those dinosaurs survived, obviously. And much like the Triassic, the Jurassic also started off with smaller dinosaurs. One of the earliest being the smaller herbivorous Heterodontosaurus, which is another dinosaur with a heterodont dentition. Interesting word there. It had some odd teeth, it had fangs, and good chewing teeth as well. It would have been very painful to get bitten by this thing, but its evolutionary line is still a bit confusing, as it's believed that it was mostly herbivorous, but it is possible it could have had some omnivorous activity due to the way its teeth are, but the consensus is mostly herbivorous. That's just the beginning, as now throughout the Jurassic period, more of the dinosaur family tree starts to get unveiled. And what do I mean by that, you may ask? Well, the dinosaurs are split into 2 main groups. Now, you may be familiar with these terms, the bird-hipped, which is the ornithischian dinosaurs, and the lizard-hipped, which is the saurischians. The saurischians consist of dinosaurs with more lizard-like traits, like the sauropodomorphs and the theropods, producing heavy hides with thick skin. The ornithischians are more bird-built, and the group consists of dinosaurs with mainly beaks, the ornithopods and the marginocephalians, and also the thyreorphians. Now, the first true giants of these groups came from the Triassic period, actually. Wait, what? Yes, it's only fitting to talk about it now when talking about the formation of the family tree. But the first big dinosaur was called the Ingentia prima, literally meaning the first giant, and this is the earliest known sauropod we have. The reason you don't hear about this is because it's very obscure and completely ancient, lived in the late Triassic period. It weighed close to 10 tons and it was about 10 meters, and completely changed our views on gigantism, swaying towards the consensus that it could have started during the late Triassic. as this dinosaur was found in 2015, rather recent, creating changes in what we think started gigantism. Because, well, there was actually more. The Thechodontosaurus, which was pretty small, the Masopondylus, and the Lethengosaurus, and the biggest of the bunch being the Plateosaurus. Now, these were all prosauropods. They had half-formed sauropod-like bodies and developed the ability to stand on hind legs and pull down branches to eat tall vegetation, off trees and such. But these were less of a sauropod than the Ingentia prima, and nowhere near the size. Now, yes, this is all astounding, but these were protosauropods. But the first true sauropods appeared in the Jurassic period. These early forms were already beginning to show the traits that would make them the very successful herbivores they actually were. The shift to a plant-based diet allowed them to inhabit certain ecological niches, paving the way for their later evolution into gigantic creatures. Now, some later ones, being the Volcanodon and the Apatosaurus, which followed, the basic sauropod body plans and started to push the size higher and higher with Apatosaurus. And only from there they continued to get, ridiculously big, with the absolute giants like the Apatosaurus and the Mamenchisaurus, which had a ridiculously long neck that gives Plesiosaur a real matchup, the Camarasaurus, and the very well-known ones being the Diplodocus with the longest tail ever, and the Brachiosaurus, our favorite gentle giant. And some absolute giants you don't hear about too often being the Giraffatitan and the Oceanotitan, which lived also in the Jurassic period, which have Titan in their name simply because of how massive and particularly tall and absolutely towering they are in comparison to Diplodocus, for example, who's more flat but extremely long. Enough on these gentle giants for now. I just felt as if I have to name all of them. They have some pretty cool, interesting names. But let's keep it more simple for now. What about the other herbivores you may be asking about? Well, the Jurassic was also home to the Thyreorphians, which was a clade to Ornithischian dinosaurs which were categorized by their armor plating on the body. Now, this is where they first originated in the Jurassic period, with the beautiful group being the Stegosaurs, which albeit are not very smart, but still are very elegant. You have the Kentrosaurus, which lived in Africa and actually saw the Giraffatitan, and it was a smaller, very spiky stegosaur, which would be an absolute pain to fight regardless of what you are. It would be like fighting a porcupine. And of course, the almighty ancient Stegosaurus, with the massive bone plates on its back and that really sharp, Thagomizer. And around the Stegosaurs, in the late Jurassic, another group actually popped up around the same time, the Iguanodontians, which were categorized by their massive, robust bodies and their very handyman-like hands, that ranged from tiny, like the Dryosaurus, to huge, like the Iguanodon itself, which lived in the Cretaceous period. Now, what's interesting is their hands. The Iguanodon, for example, has 3 fingers in the center that form a sort of hoof-like structure, with a smaller finger to the side, and then the thumb spike, which is probably used for self-defense against predators, which leads us to our next topic, the theropods. In the Jurassic, the theropods got big pretty quickly, just like the sauropods, with the Dilophosaurus and the Arctic Cryolophosaurus and the Monolophosaurus, and of course the underdog being the Ceratosaurus, these being primarily examples of earlier medium-sized theropods that lived from the early to the middle Jurassic period. And only giants would be in the late Jurassic, but there wasn't too many. To name some, there was the Torvosaurus, Yangchuanosaurus, which was China's unique predator at the time, and of course the Allosaurus, who I don't need to go into detail about. And actually, one more obscure thing being the Veterupistosaurus, which was the first Carcharodontosaurid. Watch my Allosaurid video to understand more on these creatures and the Morris information in North America, which a lot of these were home to. Now, the Jurassic period is done. Now, let's briefly talk about the very well-known Cretaceous period and what lived in that. But there's a problem with that. Well, there's a lot to unpack here. The Cretaceous had lots of continuity with the Jurassic period. There was lots of groups that continued to come through, like the Thyreorphians. Within this group, there was the Ankylosaurs, which older ones date back to the Jurassic period actually, like the Garguliosaurus and the Maiamorapelta. They started out smaller, still tanks though, and then evolved into the larger ones millions of years later in the late Cretaceous, with the Edmontonia, Euphocephalus, and of course the Ankylosaurus, which is one of the only known dinosaurs to be able to match up against T-Rex. And same with the Triceratops, which the Ceratopsians group also originated here, around this time. And something interesting is that this is mostly a North American group, with only a few like the Protoceratops being found in Mongolia. Or elsewhere, should I say. This group has the iconic Styracosaurus, Triceratops, and the almost as massive Eotriceratops. These live alongside the massive theropods, of course, like the Tyrannosaurus in North America, which had the strongest bites of all theropods, like the Daspletosaurus, which was the earlier North American counterpart to its later member, the beautiful Tyrannosaurus rex. And of course, all the way in Asia, we had more of them. The Tarbosaurus, the Alioramus, and the Yutyrannus, which was not a distinct tyrannosaur, but in the Tyrannosauria superfamily, the Proceratosauridae are in there, and so is Yutyrannus. Now, they had the strongest bites, but they definitely had some competitors in terms of scariness factor. You had the Carcharodontosaurids, who dominated during this time in mostly continents outside of North America, like South America and Africa. In Argentina, we saw the Giganotosaurus and the Mapusaurus and the Tyrannotitan, all slayers of massive sauropods. And also, the most unlikely member of this group was the Concavenator, which actually lived in Europe, and of course, the well-known African counterpart, the Carcharodontosaurus, who also saw the legs of the biggest theropod ever, the Spinosaurus, which yes, lived in Africa. And on the topic of Spinosaurids, they started in the early Cretaceous with baryonyx and irritator. Yes, he's very irritating, adapting semi-aquatic lifestyles and waiting for fish with that long, awkward, skinny snout. Well, at least it goes for some of them. Okay, let's finish up here with the herbies, shall we? Like I said, the Jurassic continuity was still strong, as the ornithopods were still here, which included the iguanodontids. And also the hadrosaurs, which are some of the biggest non-sauropod dinosaurs ever. Now, these are known as the duck-billed dinosaurs. They are literally called that because they have, well, duck-like mouths, except they had thousands of teeth inside there. Now, some of them came with big crests like the Parasaurolophus and Coelophysis, and then you have the absolute giant, the Shantungosaurus. And yes, there was more sauropods. You see, the Jurassic hosted the large groups like the Diplodocus and the other large sauropods. But in the Cretaceous, they got even bigger, frankly crazy, because now we had the Titanosaurs, some of the heaviest animals to ever walk the earth. You have the Dreadnoughtus, Ichthyosaurus, Nemenchtosaurus. Just to be clear, I don't think I said any of those right. And the most famous being the Argentinosaurus. The reason being is, well, it's the biggest animal to ever walk on planet Earth. It lived in Argentina, hence its name, Argentinosaurus, and they were essentially living earthquakes. Trust me, if they existed today, you'd hear them walking from miles away. It was 30 meters long and weighed as much as 20 elephants. And if you've ever been near an elephant, you know just the scale of this creature would be ridiculous. And with all the main groups of herbivores out of the way, there's one more group I think it's important to mention, the ornithomimids. They were literally just big chickens that ran 50 miles an hour, that is. This group has the Gallimimus and the Struthiomimus and the Ornithomimus, for examples. All very similar to each other and are almost identical to their modern-day counterpart, the ostrich. And some other, mainly Cretaceous critters, being the Dromaeosaurs. And when you think of these, you usually think of velociraptors. And no, they weren't exactly critters. They were way bigger than you think. Well, of course, the velociraptor was still turkey-sized, that never changed, but the Deinonychus could easily take down an adult human. At the early Cretaceous, there was the Utahraptor, which was one of the worst possible things you could run into, as it was massive. Now, similar to this is the Oviraptor, which comes from the theropod group too, and they look very bird-like, and since they evolved from meat-eating theropods, they actually were omnivorous. These are the dinosaurs we always associate with eggs, simply because they were known to be egg stealers, wherever that came from, where they could potentially steal and eat them like thieves, so that means no mean predators could be born. In the end, this magnificent group of creatures existed for more than 150 million years, all across the Earth, before the space rock, well, took them out, unfortunately, showing that a group of animals that don't construct anything or invent can be so unbelievably successful. As we only have been around for 300,000 years, it's nothing compared to them, and that is why they are so magnificent in our eyes. As honestly sad as it may be to think about these animals are something we will never see, their memory is definitely here. Tracks left by massive sauropods, and skeletons found all over the world of any which dinosaur species, they will certainly never be forgotten. They were just another species trying to survive just like us. They weren't monsters. Now, in this video, all I did was cover the basic timeline of what existed and when, during the dinosaurs only, because no, pterosaurs and marine reptiles weren't dinosaurs. I'm sure you knew that already. And I'll save them for other videos. Same goes with all the groups in here I mentioned. I didn't really get into them too much, I just gave you a perception of when they existed, the groups, and a few staple dinos, and that's about it. Anyway, if you like this video, subscribe for more, because I got more coming. Perhaps we'll even go further back in time than the dinosaurs. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.